The drawing appeared on Sebastian Thorne's desk sometime between his 9 o'clock call with legal and his second cup of coffee going cold. It was small, barely the size of a folded napkin, done in green and yellow crayon with the kind of fierce, stubborn pressure that only a 7-year-old channels into something she actually means. 2 stick figures, one tall, with a messy bun, one small, with pigtails and a lopsided smile. Both of them holding hands in front of something that might have been a window, or a painting, or both. Sebastian recognized his daughter immediately. He didn't recognize the other figure at all. He set down his coffee very carefully, like a man afraid any sudden movement might break something fragile, and then he just sat there in his corner office on the 38th floor of Thorne Capital's Chicago headquarters, staring at a crayon drawing, because Daisy hadn't drawn anything in 10 months. Not since the night of the accident. Let him go back about 20 minutes, so you understand how a floor nurse with paint-stained scrubs and a broken badge clip managed to do what Sebastian and 4 separate specialists had not. It was a Tuesday in March. The kind of Chicago Tuesday where the wind comes off the lake like it has a personal grievance against you. Daisy Thorne had been sitting in the family waiting area on the 4th floor of Whitmore Children's Hospital, where her father had a quarterly meeting with the board. The bodyguard, a quiet man named Kurt, who always looked slightly embarrassed to be standing guard over a 7-year-old, waited near the elevator. Daisy sat alone at a low table by the window. There were coloring sheets in front of her, the hospital kind, cheerful animals with thick outlines, all untouched. A box of crayons sat to the side, closed. She wasn't looking at any of it. She was looking at the gray lake through the glass, the way kids look at things when they're not really seeing them at all. Avery Monroe was supposed to be heading to the supply closet on the 4th floor. She was already 12 minutes behind. She'd spilled apple juice on her left sleeve at breakfast, and the badge clip on her lanyard had snapped clean off 2 days ago, and she still hadn't replaced it. She was, by most practical measures, having a regular Tuesday. She almost walked past the waiting area entirely. Almost. Avery Monroe was 29 years old, with dark hair that never quite stayed in its clip and a habit of noticing things other people walked past. She'd been a floor nurse at Whitmore Children's for 14 months, ever since finishing her art therapy certification and deciding she needed to understand what happened on the ground. The real ground, not the boardroom version of it. She had a smile that made anxious kids look twice and a way of crouching down to table height that never felt condescending, even to a 7-year-old. She paused at the doorway. She didn't look at the untouched coloring sheets. She didn't look at the closed crayon box. She looked at the girl, because she'd learned a long time ago that the thing you're supposed to notice and the thing that actually matters are rarely the same. Daisy had a particular kind of stillness about her, not the bored stillness of a kid waiting for something to be over. The other kind, the held breath kind, the kind that says, I am very careful not to take up too much space because I have learned that the world gets harder when I do. Avery walked in, picked up one of the coloring sheets, a cartoon bear, and sat down at the table without making a big deal of it. She didn't say hello, she didn't try to start a conversation. She just opened the crayon box, selected a forest green, and began coloring the bear's jacket. Daisy watched her out of the corner of one eye. Avery colored in silence. The green was honestly wrong for a jacket. She switched to a dark blue and started over on the sleeve. After about 45 seconds, she heard it, the soft sound of the crayon box sliding across the table. Daisy's small hand reached in and pulled out yellow. Avery didn't react. She just kept working on the bear's jacket. Daisy began to color, slowly at first and then with that same fierce pressure, the kind that means something. 3 minutes passed. Then Avery held up her bear, which now had a genuinely excellent blue jacket and a somewhat chaotic background, and tilted her head at it the way an artist assesses a questionable creative decision. The jacket's good, she said, mostly to herself, but I think I gave him 4 left buttons. That's either a mistake or high fashion. Daisy's mouth twitched. Avery kept a completely straight face. She turned the sheet around and studied it from another angle. Actually, you know what? I think he's just very secure in his choices. Good for him. The sound that came out of Daisy was so quiet it barely existed, a small surprised breath of a laugh, almost completely silent. Avery felt it like a current. She didn't make a big deal of it. She didn't gasp or grin or say anything at all. She just set the bear down and picked up another coloring sheet, a giraffe this time, and held it out across the table. You think he'd match better with stripes or dots? Daisy looked at the giraffe. Then she reached across and pointed very carefully at the dots. Dots, good call, classic. They colored for another 10 minutes without words. Avery told the giraffe it looked distinguished. Daisy pressed down hard on her yellow crayon and produced something that was, technically, a sun, but could also have been a very enthusiastic explosion. Avery looked at it with great seriousness. Weather forecast for today, chaos, with a high of beautiful. This time Daisy actually laughed. Small, short reel, the kind that surprises itself right out of you. And then, very quietly, in a voice that sounded like it hadn't been used in a long time, it's a sun. Avery looked at her. Obviously, I knew that. Daisy looked down at her drawing, and something in her shoulders, something she'd been holding for a long, long time, shifted very slightly. Avery reached for another crayon. Should we give the giraffe a friend? He looks lonely. Daisy thought about it seriously, the way children deliberate when something actually matters. Then she nodded. They were still drawing when Sebastian Thorne's meeting ended 20 minutes early. He came down the hall from the boardroom with his phone in his hand, and that particular gait of a man whose schedule is always 3 minutes ahead of where he actually is. He was 41, with dark hair going silver at the temples and the kind of composed face that had appeared on the cover of Chicago Business Quarterly twice without ever looking entirely comfortable about it. He'd been running Thorne Capital since his father stepped back 7 years ago, and he carried the weight of that the way tall buildings carry weather, visibly without complaint, and always heavier than people realized from the street. He turned the corner toward the waiting area and stopped. Daisy was drawing, not staring at the window, not sitting with her hands flat on the table. She was hunched over a coloring sheet, with the crayon pressed hard into the paper, and the woman across from her was saying something quiet that made Daisy's mouth pull sideways in a way Sebastian hadn't seen in 10 months. He stood in the hallway and did not move. Kurt appeared at his elbow and said nothing, which was exactly right. After another minute, Daisy looked up and saw her father. Her expression changed. Not bad, just different, like a light shifting behind a window, and she held up the coloring sheet. The giraffe now had a friend. The friend was somewhat abstract in form, possibly a horse or a cloud, but it had a yellow sun overhead and an expression of clear contentment. Sebastian walked forward and his voice came out quieter than he intended. "Did you do that?" Daisy nodded. He crouched down next to her chair the way he always did and looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked at the woman across the table, who was watching him with an expression that was impossible to fully read, warm but not showy about it. She had paint under her fingernails and a lanyard with a loose badge, and she looked like someone who did not find this situation as remarkable as he did. "She did most of it," Avery said. "I mostly contributed a 4-button bear." He wanted to ask her name. He wanted to ask what she'd done, how she'd done it, whether she could do it again tomorrow. Instead, what came out was, "Thank you." "She's easy to be with," Avery said. "She knows what she likes." Daisy watched her collect the crayons back into the box, and then, with the same careful deliberateness she'd applied to every decision in the past hour, pushed the giraffe drawing across the table toward Avery. Avery looked down at it, then at Daisy. "For me?" Daisy nodded, very slightly. "I'm going to keep this," Avery said with the same tone she'd use for something actually significant. "Thank you." Later, much later, after he'd found the second drawing on his desk, after he'd spent 15 minutes reconstructing how it got there, after he'd had 3 conversations with Kurt about the sequence of events, and still couldn't make sense of the feeling in his chest, Sebastian Thorne did something he almost never did. He went back to the 4th floor. Avery was restocking a supply cart near the nurse's station when he found her. She looked up and didn't seem particularly surprised to see him, which was its own small thing. "I wanted to say thank you," he said, properly. "You said it already." "I know." He stopped a few feet away. "She doesn't talk much." "She doesn't talk at all. Or she hasn't." He kept his voice very level. "Her mother died in a car accident. Daisy was in the car. I've brought her to 3 different therapists, a play specialist at Northwestern, an art therapy program downtown. Nothing worked." He paused. "She drew today. She talked today. And I don't know what you did differently." Avery was quiet for a moment, then, "I didn't do anything differently. I just sat down." "You talked to her." "I talked at a bear in a bad jacket. She chose to join in." She set a box on the shelf with a small, definitive motion. "Kids know when someone wants something from them, even the littlest ones. She's been asked to get better by a lot of people, I'd guess." Sebastian didn't have an answer for that because it was exactly right and it cost him something to hear it. "I'd like to ask a favor," he said, "not as a formal arrangement. I'd like Daisy to have more time like this morning, with someone who doesn't need anything from her." A pause. "With you if you're willing." Avery tilted her head. "You're asking me to be your daughter's friend." "I'm asking if you'd be willing to spend time with her, yes." She was quiet long enough that he thought she was going to say no. "Then, I'll visit with her because I want to, not because you arrange it. And if she decides she'd rather draw with someone else, that's her call." "That's fair. I have Tuesday afternoons free after 2. If she's here, I'll find her." Avery picked up the empty cart. "Don't make it a scheduled thing. Those don't work for her." He almost smiled. "You've known her for an hour." "I know," she said. "But you knew it too, or you wouldn't have tried 3 therapists." She walked back to the nurse's station, and Sebastian stood in the hallway for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. The Tuesdays became a habit without ever officially becoming one. Avery would find Daisy in the waiting area, or sometimes in the cafeteria, and they would draw, or invent stories about their drawings one detail at a time, or name the colors in the crayon box after things that had no business being colors. Tuesday afternoon sadness, the specific brown of old coffee, the blue of realizing you forgot something important. It was a particular kind of play that didn't announce itself as therapy, and that was, as far as Sebastian could tell, the entire point. He started stopping by. Not every week, not on any schedule, but sometimes, when a meeting ran short, he would appear at the edge of the waiting area and watch for a few minutes before saying anything. Once in the 4th week, Avery held a crayon out across the table toward him and said simply, "Draw something for Daisy." He looked at the crayon. He looked at the blank paper. "What should I draw?" "Anything." He drew what was, with some charity, interpretable as a dog. Daisy studied it for a long moment. Then she looked at Avery. A smile crept across her face that she clearly tried to contain and couldn't. "It's a dog," Sebastian said, with the full dignity of a man who had signed documents redirecting hundreds of millions of dollars. Avery bit the inside of her cheek. "It's a really great dog." "It looks like a table that got sad," Daisy said. One beat of complete silence. Then Sebastian laughed. A real laugh, short and startled, because his daughter had just delivered 11 consecutive words and used sad to roast his drawing, which was absolutely the correct application of the word. Avery laughed too. She pressed her hand over her mouth, but her eyes gave her away completely. They laughed until Daisy started laughing with them, and for a few minutes the 4th-floor waiting area was the loudest it had ever been on a Tuesday afternoon. Sebastian looked at Avery across the table, and she looked back, and there was a moment that neither of them quite named, but both of them noticed. He noticed other things over the following weeks. The way she remembered small details, not just about Daisy, but things he mentioned in passing, a project deadline, a restaurant he'd gone to once and didn't love. The way she never seemed to want anything from him, which was such a foreign sensation that he kept looking for the angle and kept not finding one. The way she talked to his daughter like Daisy was a full person with full standing, not a case or a project or a grief statistic. And the way she hadn't told him her last name for nearly 2 months, until he saw her staff badge on a day the clip was finally fixed. Avery Monroe. He knew that name, he just didn't for a moment know from where, then he did. Monroe Healthcare Group, Robert Monroe's company. 47 outpatient clinics across 5 states, 3 surgical centers, a partnership portfolio that overlapped with half a dozen institutions, including Whitmore Children's Hospital, which Thorn Capital's private equity arm partially funded. He didn't say anything that day. He didn't say anything for 3 more days, and by then the silence felt like a choice he hadn't quite made. He should have just asked her. That was the part he understood later, with the painful clarity that only arrives after you've been wrong twice. He should have said, "I saw your name. I know your family's company. Tell me why you're working floor shifts at a children's hospital, because there's probably a reason and I'd like to know it." He didn't ask. He waited. And in the waiting, Helena found her. Sebastian's half-sister, Helena Thorne, was 12 years younger than him, the daughter of their father's second marriage, and she'd had a particular view of the company's future since the day the will was read. It wasn't that Helena was untalented. She was sharp and meticulous and genuinely excellent at reading people, which made her dangerous in exactly the way a pressure system is dangerous. Not because it wants to hurt you, but because it will when conditions are right. She'd been watching the situation for weeks, Sebastian knew this after the fact. She'd been watching since the first Tuesday. She made her move at the Whitmore Children's Hospital Spring Gala. The ballroom of the Langford Hotel held 300 people in formal wear, all of them assembled to care visibly about children's health care and to compare their visible caring with everyone else's. It was the kind of event Sebastian attended because his name was on the donor wall in 3 places and his absence would be noted. Avery was there because Whitmore's nursing staff were invited as a matter of policy, and because Daisy, allowed to come for the first hour, had asked in her new careful voice whether Avery was going to be there. She was. She wore a simple burgundy dress, no designer label, and the lanyard was, for once, working correctly. Daisy found her immediately and attached herself to her side with the expression of someone who has located exactly the right place to be. Sebastian watched from across the room and registered, without much surprise, that he was in serious trouble. Helena appeared beside him with a champagne glass and that particular tone that was warm the way a lawyer's letter is warm. "She's lovely," Helena said, watching Avery across the room. "You seem happy." "She's been good with Daisy." "Yes," Helena said, "she has, hasn't she? Very good." He should have caught the specific weight of that word. He didn't. 30 minutes later, Helena was at the front of the room with the microphone, and the room had gone the particular quiet that happens when someone says something real at a party designed specifically to avoid it. She thanked the foundation. She spoke beautifully about children and community and trust. And then, "I want to raise a concern because I believe people in this room deserve transparency." The noise level dropped completely. Most of you know that Whitmore Children's Hospital is currently in active partnership negotiations with Monroe Healthcare Group. Her gaze found Avery across the ballroom with the precision of something calibrated. "I think it's worth asking why the daughter of Robert Monroe has spent over a year building a relationship on Whitmore's 4th floor and developing a personal relationship with the hospital's largest private equity donor, while her family's company is negotiating for expanded terms." The room held its breath. "I'm sure it's coincidental," Helena finished lightly. "I simply believe in transparency." She handed back the microphone. She didn't look at Sebastian. She didn't need to. Avery stood very still in the middle of the ballroom. Sebastian could see it from across the room. That stillness, that held breath quality, the same one he'd first noticed in the waiting area when Daisy was looking at the lake and not seeing it. The expression of someone who has been waiting for this moment and is not surprised it arrived, only by how much it still hurts. He looked at her. She looked back at him, and what he saw in her face was not guilt but exhaustion. He should have crossed the room. He should have stood next to her and said out loud, in front of the 300 people, "I know this woman. She sat down with my daughter when no one else would. Whatever else is true, I know that." He didn't. He stood still because the timing, the Monroe partnership, the 4th floor, all those Tuesdays, arranged in Helena's order, formed a shape he hadn't seen before. And his brain, which was very good at structure and very poor at context, started working. Avery picked up her small bag, crossed the room, and when she reached him, her voice was very quiet and very steady. "I should have told you who I was. I know that. I'm sorry." A pause. "But what she said isn't true." He didn't answer. Not because he believed Helena, but because he didn't yet have the certainty he needed, and the silence stretched long enough to become an answer anyway. She nodded once and walked out. Daisy was at the edge of the ballroom with one of the hospital coordinators. She had seen her father's face. She had seen Avery leave. She had seen the shape of what had just happened with the clear, unsentimental vision of a 7-year-old who has already survived the worst thing she could imagine and knows how unfairness looks. She walked to the microphone stand. She didn't ask for it. She simply reached up with the same determined grip she used on her crayons and pulled it down to her height. "That's not true," Daisy said into the quiet ballroom. "She didn't come to the hospital for any of that. She came because she sat down with me." She paused. "That's all she did. She just sat down." She put the microphone back. The room stayed quiet for another 3 seconds. Then someone in the back started clapping, slowly, and it moved through the ballroom the way applause does when it means something beyond the performance. Helena said nothing. She had not, in any of her calculations, accounted for the 7-year-old. Sebastian stood in the middle of the Langford Hotel ballroom and understood, with sudden and painful clarity, that he had made an enormous mistake. He spent that night and the following 2 days doing what he did with every high-stakes problem. He took it apart completely. He obtained the actual negotiation timeline from Monroe Healthcare's partner firm. The partnership talks had begun 14 months ago. Avery had taken the nursing position at Whitmore 14 months ago. The timelines ran parallel, not consecutive. She'd been on the floor before the negotiations existed. No overlap, no strategy. He called Whitmore's HR department and asked, formally, whether any staff member had ever requested access to Thorn Capital documents or private equity materials. The answer was no. Then he called Robert Monroe. Robert Monroe was, he discovered, deeply tired of explaining to his daughter that running a healthcare company was not the same as understanding one, and that the years she'd spent on the floor of Whitmore Children's Hospital was the first time in her career that he felt entirely certain she was going to be okay. He had not asked her to go. She had not told him she was going. He'd found out 3 months in when a staff photo ended up in his inbox by accident. "She does things her own way," Robert Monroe said, and he sounded both exasperated and proud. Sebastian thanked him. He sat in his office for a long time, then he went to find Avery. She was at the hospital. Of course she was. It was Tuesday. He found her in the supply hallway. She looked at him without expression. "I need to apologize," Sebastian said. "You already left the message." "I know. This is different." He stopped 2 feet away. "I stood there and let the silence mean something I didn't actually believe because I was confused and afraid, and that is not an excuse." A breath. "Helena fabricated the timeline. I have documentation. She's off the board as of this morning, and she's been served with a formal defamation notice that outlines exactly what the next step looks like if she says anything further." He paused. "She'll feel it." "Good," Avery said simply. "She should." "You should have told me who you were." "Yes." No argument. "I kept waiting for the right moment, and the right moment kept getting further away. That's on me." "Why did you come here in the first place?" She was quiet for a moment, choosing between the easy answer and the real one. "I'm going to run my father's company, and I realized I didn't actually know what happens in a hospital. Not really. I knew the numbers and the board decks and the strategic positioning. I didn't know what it felt like at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon in a waiting room when a kid is sitting alone." A pause. "I needed to know that before I made decisions about people's care." Sebastian looked at her. "That's not what someone does when they're gathering information against you." "No," she agreed, "it's not." They stood in the supply hallway while the hospital moved around them. A cart going past, a soft announcement over the intercom, the ambient sound of a place where serious things happen quietly. "I'd like to start over," Sebastian said. "Not because I've resolved everything, because I want the chance to not make the same mistakes twice." Avery considered him. "You understand that starting over with a 7-year-old's attachment involved is not actually starting over." "I know." "She's going to hold me to every promise I make from here forward." "I know that too." He almost smiled. "She told me the night of the gala that I had made things very complicated and that I should fix it before it got worse. Those were her exact words." Something in Avery's face changed. Not dramatically, not a movie moment shift, just a small change like a room getting slightly warmer. "Okay," she said, "but everything is up front from now on, all of it." "I want that. And I'm still showing up on Tuesdays, not because of you." "I know." "Because of the 7-year-old." "I know," he said. She made that very clear. Avery picked up a box from the cart, and the half-smile that crossed her face was the least performed thing he'd ever seen from anyone. "Your dog drawing was genuinely terrible." "It was." "You should practice." "I have been, actually." They both paused on that. The image of him, alone in his office at some late hour, practicing drawing a dog because his daughter had said it looked like a sad table. Avery looked at him for a long moment. "Then show me Thursday." He showed her Thursday. The dog was marginally better. Daisy said it now looked like a shoe that was trying its best. They agreed that was progress and moved on. The months after were not simple. Avery gave Sebastian the full picture of the Monroe healthcare negotiations on a Saturday morning over coffee she made herself, which was considerably better than his, and he read everything and asked questions and then offered his read on the capital structure. And she identified 3 things he hadn't considered. Her father met Sebastian and said almost nothing for 40 minutes before deciding apparently that the silence was endorsement enough. Helena's legal situation produced a settlement that would ensure, among other consequences, that she did not misrepresent herself or anyone else in a professional context for the foreseeable future. Daisy got a new art therapist at school, a kind and careful woman named Dr. Ewan, whom Avery had personally recommended and whom Daisy liked enormously. And she also still drew with Avery on Tuesday afternoons. And she talked now in the easy, continuous way of a kid who has remembered that talking is simply something she does. The wedding was small. 32 people held in the courtyard garden of Whitmore Children's Hospital on a Saturday in October, when the light did that particular thing it does in Chicago in the fall, going gold and long through everything. The facilities director had initially said the courtyard had never been used for anything like this. Then Daisy had presented him with a handwritten letter that included a drawing of the courtyard in yellow and green crayon, the giraffe, the friend, the sun, all of it, and he had read the letter twice, looked at the drawing for a long time, and said yes. Avery's best friend Nina cried during the vows and blamed allergies. Robert Monroe sat in the front row with the expression of a man who is profoundly relieved and would prefer not to explain the full depth of that relief to anyone present. Sebastian's team at Thorn Capital sent a group card that was, by internal accounts, written by committee, which explained why it was surprisingly moving. Daisy carried the rings. She wore a yellow dress that matched the sun she'd drawn the very first day, and she held the pillow with both hands, with exactly the same careful pressure she applied to a crayon when she was drawing something that mattered. After the vows, which were short and direct, because both of them preferred it that way, Daisy walked up between them and put one hand in Avery's and one hand in her father's. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Later, after the guests had gone and the garden lights had come up against the darkening October sky, Sebastian and Avery sat at the low table where coloring sheets had once been set out for waiting patients. Long before any of this, the sheets were gone. The table was the same. Avery rested her head against his shoulder. She did this. She did most of it. She just picked up a crayon. Sebastian looked up at the fourth-floor windows lit from inside. She always knows what she likes. Avery laughed quietly, and in the garden of Whitmore Children's Hospital, in the October dark and the warm string lights, the sound of it carried all the way up to the fourth floor and back down again, unhurried, like it had nowhere else to be.